Finally, the thing I'll also touch on and just flag that we're working, because a lot of people ask us about it, is the key ethical considerations. And we broke these down into sort of in three key areas. There's ethical considerations around the potential applications, around how you get the biological cells, and a potential moral status of the device itself. So we're working with a number of independent bioethicists on this issue. And just looking at time, I believe it was meant to go, might be running a bit over time. So I won't dive into these in any details, but if you have questions about this, I'd be really happy to chat about it in more details. The final thing I'm going to touch on is really what us as a company now is focusing on, and that is improving the accessibility of this technology, which really has become our core focus now. And that's because we see this field really as mirroring the nascent computing industry field. So you start out in the 60s and 70s, and you had stuff like the IBM S360. It took up a room and required a team of technicians and PhD graduates to operate. And that's where we are now, sitting here doing our best, with our big incubators and big labs and complicated work to keep things running and alive. The big breakthrough with computing, I don't think anyone would dispute, was really the invention of the personalized computer such as the Apple II, where suddenly anybody could get one of these devices and begin to iterate and explore with it and develop new applications and build the community. And then 30 plus years on, we now have phones that can have more computing power than we used to land people on the moon. That's where we want to go. We're trying to build out a system that we'll call it the Cortical Labs 1 system, or the CL1 system. And we're going to hopefully be able to provide that to people in a way that is very affordable so they can actually start to build and iterate. And the ingenuity of the community will far exceed what any one company or group of researchers can do. And if that's the case, 30 years on, what might be possible? I suspect we can't even tell at this point. Although I've shared some ideas, I think there's going to be even more exciting ones that I would never even think of. And so this is an example. We've gone ahead and we've sort of built it. This is an early prototype of the Cortical Labs system, running cells in this perfusion circuit that keeps them alive, basically as a life support system for extended periods of time. And because of that, we can have them playing the game for extended periods of time and learning. In this case, we were doing tests up to 18 hours a day, but we have done longer for up to about a month. And we're doing more of that work right now as we speak. But there is a next version now that we've sort of worked out some of the issues, which is currently being in production, and we're hoping to have our first prototypes by next month. So this is a Cortical Labs system. I'll go back actually, and it'll be able to do stuff like control the temperature, control the gas mixtures, control the rate of flow, and then it will, I'm just going to flick through these, basically have cells that you can embed inside the system. For those if anyone does cell biology, you can be able to change the waste in the media very easily. It should only have to happen about once every month, once every 2 weeks. And it'll have a removable MEA reader in it, which means it can be quite cheap to purchase the box, and then you can purchase some separate readers, and that should make it very affordable, because that, along with this sort of chip, are the most expensive parts. And then if we can make it affordable enough, that means that any lab could have one of these sort of server racks sitting in there, which will just provide people with an enormous capability to investigate these questions. And to aid with that, we're going to be providing people with cloud-native web-first development tools so they can easily build up the environments, like the Pong environment, opposed to, for us, where it took 18 months of hardcore development. They can now do it in just a few days or hours even, depending on their familiarity with these languages. Or we can work with them to help them if they have no familiarity, of course. And so, sort of to wrap up, there's this question of where does this leave us? Because there's obviously still uncertainty in many directions. And although I think we've made some exciting steps forward, there's still many challenges that we need if we want this technology to reach its full potential. But some people do look at it and say, look, it does feel a bit more like science fiction. But I think that science fiction ends and science begins once we start working on the problem in a rigorous way. And what our goal is not just to have us be able to work on the problem, but have a community-wide effort who can work on the problem. And I believe if we do that, we'll actually be able to maximize the probability for a successful outcome. And what could occur in the future, I think, is incredibly exciting as a new paradigm to provide us a new tool to solve some of the problems currently facing us. And as part of that community-wide effort, of course, I have complete thanks and gratitude towards the Cortical Labs team, which has actually grown. There's a few names that joined the last week or two that I have to add onto here.
Because I can imagine this kind of logic might work in a variety of biological systems, and
there's a lot of, and that's also why I try to take the broader term and call it synthetic biological intelligence opposed to neurocomputation or something. I'm also, some computing people get upset if you say the brain does computation. So do some biologists. Naming things is a minefield.
Sure.
But yeah, we really should be exploring all of these options and also maybe how they can interact. But there's just so much there. You need to pick an area and say, look, this is where we're going to camp out for a while and map out a bit. And that's what we're doing with the predominantly cortical cells.
That's awesome. Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll let us move on to the next questions now.
Yeah, just on the Michael Levin bit, I just posted his poster presentation here in the chat for those of you who don't know about it yet. But I think that many people here are somewhat familiar with his work. Also has very interesting implications for regeneration and longevity potentially. But yeah, I am super curious to ask you, I've been working on this piece on biological robotics, and I know that at least in one of your previous presentations, I think one of your teammates also mentioned potential implications for robotics, right? And you can already see that, and you've also alluded to it a little bit, but you said it's a little bit further down the road. So I'm super curious, obviously Mike Levin's work on xenobots is relatively robotics, at least applicable, but I'm super curious, if and when you already think about potential real robotic implications for Cortical Labs, beyond they have the virtual pong and so forth.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that the Xenobot work's really cool. I don't know. As someone with chronic pain, I often feel like I could do away with most of the body, but I like my brain and how that works. So I'd be all right with that. I need to go to biological, but there's a lot of merits to exploring all of these options. Don't get me wrong. I think for us, robotics really would come out as the control system for robotics. If you look at, this is the example I often use. As part of the reason we have the little rendered robotic dog there as the example at the end. If you sort of think about what's the best aid you can give to someone who's visually impaired, quite often it's a guide dog, not a guide robot, not a guide machine learning algorithm, but a guide dog. And that's because, as I said, machine learning requires huge amounts of data to learn to do anything and to adapt to new situations. It typically can't. It fails if you change the environment the machine learning system learned in. Dogs, however, can aid people in a variety of circumstances using biological intelligence. So let's say that we could take the reliability of the robotic dog and machine-wise, stuff like Boston Dynamics built, or many of the clones that now exist, they work really well in terms of moving around an environment. They could use some help in terms of navigating novel environments independently. They're actually not able to do that in really any sense, any practical sense. So what if we could take the advantages of the biology, the advantages of the robotics, and bring them together, right? We already have this ground truth that biology can navigate a novel environment. We all do it. Dogs do it. It's simply a matter of how do we implement it in a robotic system. And so it is further off, don't get me wrong, but I think, I don't even think it is possible because we've seen it done. How is a big question, but it's possible. So we should start to investigate how to get there.
Very cool. Okay, wonderful. We have Tomo also with another question here.
Yeah, I guess my main question would be, once the behavior is learned or a certain training is done and the outputs are stabilized in the cell cultures, can you train the neural nets on a population of the cells, in their input and output, and see if you can do maybe better than the in silico training on just ball position and such? And the main idea is, you're not going to capture the full capability of the neural culture, but one thing might be, fear of not being able to replicate the same computations if you lose the, current cell culture, for example, and basically preserving some of the more advanced computations that it's doing. Do you think it's possible?
Yeah, so I'll give two different angles of an answer on this. One is, yes, I think it's possible. I think it's difficult. The complexity, and I think especially a lot of machine learning people who haven't looked at biological cultures, often when we bring machine learning people in and we show them the cultures, they have a shift in their thinking about this. Because when you see the connectivity occurring in biological cultures, you realize it far exceeds what you can have through any neural network, like artificial neural network, I should say, in terms of the number of nodes and connections that are there. It's far more complicated. So look, do I think it's possible to do that? Yes. Do I think it's efficient to do that? Probably not. We can't really model a single neuron at the moment very well without huge computational power, let alone networks of them. It wouldn't be efficient. So I think the flip side, despite it being possible, that I would say, is that you mentioned the fear of losing that culture or losing the replicability. I think that is something that, rather than fearing it, we accept as a feature of this type of system. If there's something you need to learn and stabilize so it does the same thing every time, don't use biology. If something can be automated that well, we don't even want to use humans for it, right? We tend to want to automate anything that can be done in that highly replicable manner. That's what automation is, and it's great. Silicon works amazing. Yes, there's a large power consumption, but we can solve that in other ways by renewables and better, et cetera, whole discussion. So instead, what I would say is what I think we should be looking for is like, where is it that we want a system that maybe doesn't need to retain that exact problem, that exact weightings and solution, but instead can have an approximate, act as a generalized, I don't know how to describe it, as a generalized intelligence for solving the tasks. So yeah, I would just sort of suggest a different way to look at it and how this technology could be used, although I definitely think it is, in theory, possible to do what you're suggesting.
Okay, now
Thank
I
you.
still have 1 or 2 more questions, depending on how fast we go through them. First one being that you already alluded to like what we could be striving for if we were looking at a pretty ambitious path for the next 10 years. Do you have any like internal roadmap or something that you could wave to us, kind of almost like as a carrot of, if you think that your progress will continue, roughly like what are a few of the kind of like milestones that you think you'll be hitting in the next like few years or something?
Yeah, I mean, some of this, obviously, I'm not going to talk about right now from IP reasons, but really, like, as I said in the talk, like one of the big things for us is improving accessibility for people and improving the way we can interact with it. Just making easier tools is really important. Predicting the future of this is also really difficult because so far we could make really rapid progress in advancing because there's decades of research and all the individual pieces we use to fit together into the puzzle. Now, other people are starting to join this work and start to investigate it in very serious, well-funded ways. Does that mean that there will be a linear progression? Because although maybe we start to, plumb out the usefulness of previous work, more resources come in and people can continue to make progress. Does that mean that there'll be an exponential improvement as we, as a community start to, iterate off each other? This is what my personal belief could happen is, but it could also be that there's a drop off in the improvement because, we use up the existing research and allows us to make the early advancements, and then we hit some barriers along the way. We don't know till we explore it. I think what's exciting for us, though, is some of the initial work, such as the cognitive or pseudo-cognitive drug testing, can help people immediately, as is, even though our current system, like we're under no delusions and we're not going to pretend to anyone that this system is a perfect system. Like it's still a basic prototype. But even this basic prototype has huge capability to improve how we understand how drugs and disease models progress. And we've now developed enough data. I wasn't able to share all of it with you, but we've now developed enough data to support that. So I think the next few years, what we'll really see is it coming out predominantly in drug discovery and disease modeling, before then being applied to some very simple, basic real-world applications. And then what goes beyond that, let's see how the community works together. I think it's a really exciting area.